Hello everyone. I have compiled all my videos of the chapter Life Processes into one and covered most of the topics. So watch it for complete revision of this chapter. The first topic is living beings. All the things around us are either living or non-living, means they have life or they do not have life. Now, what are the criteria that determine whether a particular thing has life, or we can say whether a particular thing is living? So, first is movement. All the living beings are able to move by themselves, like plants and animals. Animals can move their body parts like hands, legs, eyes, etc. And plants are also able to move their body parts in response to some stimulus, like roots can move towards water, away from sunlight, and stems move toward sunlight. Animals can move from one place to another also, which is called locomotion. However, plants cannot show locomotion. Second, all living beings need food, air, water. They all grow in size and weight. All living beings respond to the changes in the surrounding. They all respire for breaking down food into energy. All living beings excrete to throw out the waste substances out of their body. All the living beings reproduce to propagate themselves by producing their own kind. Now the next topic is life processes. What are life processes? All the basic functions performed by living beings to maintain their life are called life processes. For example, nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion, control and coordination, growth, movement, reproduction, etc. So I'll be taking up these life processes one by one in detail in the coming videos. So stay tuned. Hello everyone. Today I will be explaining modes of nutrition. Before we proceed, we must know what is food, nutrients and nutrition. All the living beings need energy to perform various life processes which is obtained from food. So food is a kind of fuel which provides energy to all the living beings. We need chemical energy which is obtained from food. And our food contains various nutrients like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, mineral salts, vitamins and water, which are essential for the normal growth and development of an organism. So a nutrient can be defined as a substance in our food which is used to provide energy or for the biosynthesis of body constituents like tissues and organs. Now what is nutrition? Nutrition is a process of intake and utilization of nutrient by an organism. Now let's come to our main topic, which is mode of nutrition. The method of procuring or obtaining food by an organism is called mode of nutrition. It is mainly of two types. And the first is autotrophic mode of nutrition. Auto means self and troph means nutrition here. So these living beings can synthesize their own food by utilizing inorganic substances like water and carbon dioxide in the presence of sun's light energy. For example, green plants and some bacteria. These living beings contain a pigment called chlorophyll which traps the light energy and is used to form organic food from inorganic substances like water and carbon dioxides. So these autotrophs are producers as they produce food, and this food is used by humans and other animals also. Now second is heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Here hetero means others and troph means nutrition, as I told. These living beings cannot prepare their own food from inorganic substances and take it from other living beings. For examples, animals and bacteria and fungi like yeast. Heterotrophic mode of nutrition can further be of three types. And the first is saprophytic or saprotrophic mode of nutrition. Sapro means rotten and trop means nutrition. So these living beings obtain their food from decaying organic matter of dead animals, plants and other rotten things. These are called saprophytes. For example, the fungi like bread molds, mushrooms and yeast and bacteria. These saprophytes break down the complex organic substances outside their body into smaller or simpler substances and then absorb it and take it as food. And the second is parasitic mode of nutrition. These are the living beings which derive their food from the body of other living beings. They are called parasites, and the plant or animals from where they derive their food are called host. These parasites don't kill the host but are harmful for them. This mode of nutrition is followed by fungi, bacteria and some plants like cuscuta, which is called amar bale in Hindi, and animals like plasmodium, tapeworm, ticks, lice, leeches and roundworms, etc. Then comes Holozoic mode of nutrition. In this mode of nutrition, the living beings take the food from outside into their body. After ingesting the food inside their body, it is broken down in the digestive system of the organism. It is broken down into the simplest and the smallest molecules and then absorbed by the body cells of the organism. In this video, I will be explaining nutrition in plants. All green plants contain chlorophyll pigment, and this pigment is present in the cell organelle chloroplast in the plant cells. This pigment has the ability to trap sun's light energy, and due to this, the plants are able to produce their own food using carbon dioxide and water as raw material. It means plants are autotrophs. The process by which plants prepare their own food using carbon dioxide and water as raw material in the presence of sun's light energy and chlorophyll is called photosynthesis. The green parts of the plants, which are mainly leaves and sometimes stems also, can perform this process. During photosynthesis, the plants prepare glucose as food, and this glucose is transported to all the parts of the plants from leaves. An extra amount of glucose produced in the leaves is converted into starch and stored temporarily in the leaves itself, and gradually it is transported to other parts of the plants. So what are the necessary conditions, or we can say what are the requirements for photosynthesis? They are sunlight, carbon dioxide, water and chlorophyll. Now, what are the steps of photosynthesis? The first step is absorption of sunlight by chlorophyll. And the second, splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen. And the third is reduction of carbon dioxide by hydrogen into glucose. Hello everyone, there are few experiments based on photosynthesis in your syllabus, and before conducting any of these experiments you need to destarch the plant to be used in the experiment. And destarching means removal of starch from the leaves of the plant. Why do we do that? Well, all green plants perform photosynthesis and they prepare glucose as their food, which is converted into starch and stored in the leaves itself. Gradually, this starch is transported to other parts of the plants. So, presence of starch in the leaves is a proof that photosynthesis has taken place. So, when we are conducting the experiment based on photosynthesis, the presence of starch in the leaves in the experimental plant will show the occurrence of photosynthesis process. But for that we need to remove the already present starch in the plant. How do we do that? We keep the potted plant to be used in the experiment in a completely dark room for 3 to 4 days, and during that time all the starch which was already present in the leaves of the plant is transported to other parts of the plants, and now the leaves are without any starch and no new starch is formed because the plant is in the dark room and no photosynthesis is taking place. To check the presence of starch in something, we use iodine solution, which is potassium triiodide. This solution is reddish brown in color, and when it reacts with starch, it changes its color from reddish brown to bluish black. So, changing of this iodine solution from reddish brown to bluish black shows the presence of starch in the object taken for the experiment. And if the color of this iodine solution does not change, it remains the same, which is reddish brown, it means there is no starch present in the objects we have taken for the test. It is very easy to conduct this iodine test with potato. We just have to peel it off and we take a piece of potato, and then we pour a few drops of iodine solution over it. The changing of color of this iodine solution from reddish brown to bluish black confirms the presence of starch in the potato piece taken. But it is not so simple to conduct this iodine test with a leaf because of two reasons. The first is in case of potato, potato is a starch storage part of the plant, or we can say food storage part of the plant, which is nothing more than a ball of starch, while the leaf has many other components in it besides starch. And the second reason is the starch is present deep inside the leaf cells. So, for conducting this iodine starch test with the leaf, we have to follow a few steps before, so that the iodine solution can penetrate or can reach inside the leaf cells and react with the starch present in the leaf cells. So what do we do? First of all, we take a leaf and put it in boiling water for a few minutes. Why do we do so? Because it breaks down the cell membrane of the leaf cells, and which in turn helps iodine solution to penetrate inside the leaf cells and react with the starch. After that, we put this leaf in alcohol which is heated by water bath. Why is it done? Because this breaks down the chlorophyll in the leaf cells and the leaf gets decolorized. Decolorized leaf looks white, and the changing of color of iodine solution in this white leaf becomes clearly visible. After that, we take the leaf and wash it under hot water. Why do we do so? Because this leaf had turned hard when it was put in the alcohol. After doing all this, we take the leaf in a petri dish, and now this leaf is ready for the iodine test. We pour a few drops of iodine over this leaf and observe. If the color of this iodine solution changes from reddish brown to bluish black, it means the starch was present in this leaf, or the starch is present in this leaf. If the color of this iodine solution does not change from reddish brown to bluish black, it remains the same, it means there is no starch present in the leaves which we have used in the experiment. Hello everyone. The question is, where does photosynthesis take place in a plant? Yes, photosynthesis takes place in the green parts of the plant, which are mainly leaves and sometimes green stems also. Now the question is, where exactly does photosynthesis take place in a leaf? For this, let us observe the cross section of a leaf. A leaf has an upper and lower epidermis, and the tiny pores called stomata are present on either upper or lower or both epidermis of a leaf. The cells present between these two epidermis are called mesophyll cells, and they are of two types. The mesophyll cells which are present just below the upper epidermis are called palisade cells. They are long and oval to rectangular in shape. And the second type of mesophyll cells are located just below the palisade cells. They are somewhat round and have more intercellular space as compared to palisade cells. These two types of mesophyll cells, which are palisade and spongy cells, are rich in chlorophyll content. Each cell contains more than 100 chloroplasts in it, because they are the highly specialized cells for the task of photosynthesis. So now we know that the process of photosynthesis takes place in the mesophyll cells of a leaf. Hello everyone. The question is, how do leaves obtain water and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis? A plant absorbs water and other nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium and iron, etc. From soil by its roots. The root of a plant has number of root hair in it, and each root hair is a single celled structure and is in close contact with the soil. So numerous root hair on root increases the area of contact with the soil water, and this water enters in the root hair by osmosis, which means movement of water from its higher concentration to its lower concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. And here the cell membrane of root hair works as a semi-permeable membrane. Once the water reaches in the root hair cell, it enters in the other cell of the root by cell to cell osmosis. The root of a plant contains xylem vessels for transport of water, which are interconnected with the xylem vessels of stems and leaves. So, passing through these xylem vessels, water reaches in the leaves for photosynthesis. From xylem tissue, water enters in other cells of the leaves, including guard cells in the epidermis. Now let's see how does CO2 reaches in the leaves for photosynthesis. So two kidney shaped guard cells enclose a tiny pore called stomata in the epidermis of the leaf, and when water reaches each and every cell of a leaf, including these guard cells become turgid and swollen, and they bulge outward. This causes widening of stoma, and as a result the carbon dioxide in the air outside diffuses in. This way carbon dioxide reaches in the leaves for photosynthesis. Hello everyone. In this video I will explain the process of nutrition in simple animals, taking the example of amoeba. Before I go into details, let me list the steps of nutrition. First is ingestion, second digestion, then absorption, after that assimilation, and the fifth step of nutrition is egestion. Now let us see how these 5 steps of nutrition take place in amoeba. First, ingestion. Amoeba ingests, that is takes in, food using its pseudopodia. When a food particle comes near amoeba, it forms finger-like projections around it, and these finger-like projections are called pseudopodia, which means false feet, and engulfs this food with a little water around it, and this is called food vacuole. Then takes place digestion. The digestive enzymes from the cytoplasm enter into the food vacuole and break down the food. Then takes place absorption of this food. This digested food in the food vacuole diffuses out and becomes the part of cytoplasm. After that, the absorbed food is used by amoeba for respiration, growth and reproduction, and this is called assimilation step of nutrition. Now takes place egestion. When considerable amount of undigested food collects inside amoeba, then cell membrane suddenly ruptures from any point and the undigested food is thrown out. Similarly, paramecium also gets its nutrition, but here the food is taken from a specific spot which acts like mouth. In this video, I will give you the details of the process of nutrition in human beings. So let's start. Human digestive system consists of alimentary canal and associated glands. Digestive organs in the alimentary canal are mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine and large intestine. And the glands are salivary gland, liver, pancreas. Alimentary canal is 9 meter in length and the glands open into alimentary canal and pour digestive juices into this. Now let us discuss the details of human digestive process under the steps of nutrition. Like first step, that is ingestion. Human beings have a special organ for ingestion of food, that is mouth. The food is put into the mouth with the help of hands. So this is what? Ingestion. Second is digestion. Digestion of food begins in the mouth itself. Buccal cavity contains teeth, tongue and salivary gland. Teeth help in cutting food into small pieces, chewing and grinding, which is physical digestion. Saliva wets the food, means saliva makes the food wet and makes it easy to swallow. It also contains amylase enzyme, which is also called salivary amylase enzyme, which begins to break starch into glucose. As food stays in mouth for a very short time, so complete digestion of starch does not take place in mouth. After this food goes into esophagus, that is food pipe, and is pushed down by the help of muscles which are present on the walls of esophagus by contraction and expansion of muscles. This contraction and expansion of muscle is called peristaltic movement. Now the food reaches in a bag-like organ called stomach. Here the food is churned with the help of muscles on the wall of stomach and digested for 3 hours. 3 glands in the stomach release hydrochloric acid, pepsin and mucus. Mucus protects the inner lining of stomach from damage due to acid, which is released by the stomach itself. HCl means hydrochloric acid makes the food medium acidic, which initiates digestion of protein in food by the enzyme pepsin and also kills bacteria in food. Third enzyme is pepsin. Pepsin is a digestive enzyme which breaks down protein into smaller molecules. In fact, pepsinogen is secreted first, which is changed into pepsin by hydrochloric acid. Now this partially digested food is sent to small intestine in small amounts, controlled by sphincter muscle at the exit point of stomach. Small intestine is 6.5 meter in length. In an adult man, it is the largest part of alimentary canal but is narrow. It is the site of complete digestion of food like carbohydrates, proteins and fats. Small intestine receives 2 secretions of glands. First, liver. Liver secretes yellowish green juice, which is called bile juice, and it is alkaline in nature due to the presence of sodium bicarbonate in it. Alkaline bile turns acidic food into alkaline. Bile salt breaks fat into small droplets for further breakdown. This breaking down of fat into small droplets is called emulsification of fat. Now comes pancreas. It secretes pancreatic juices like amylase, means pancreatic amylase, which breaks starch into maltose. Then trypsin, which breaks protein into small peptides or amino acids. Third is lipase, which breaks fat into fatty acids and glycerol. Intestinal walls secrete enzymes which break down carbohydrate into glucose, proteins into amino acids and fats into fatty acids and glycerol, and these are water soluble. Chemical digestion of food is brought about by biological catalysts called enzymes. So these all are enzymes. Now absorption part of the nutrition. The wall of the small intestine, specifically ileum part of the small intestine, has millions of finger-like projections called villi, which increase the surface area of small intestine for faster absorption of digested food. These villi have blood capillaries in them. The digested food can pass through the thin walls of intestine and enters into the blood through the capillaries. Now the assimilation part of the nutrition. The blood carries digested food to all the parts of the body and it becomes the part of the cells. This food is used by the cells for obtaining energy, growth and repair of the body. Extra amount of digested food which is not used up by the body immediately is stored in the liver in the form of glycogen. This is used for the source of energy by the body when required by breaking down into glucose. Now the last step of process of nutrition, that is egestion. Undigestible part of food is not absorbed in the small intestine and is passed into large intestine. Water part of this undigested food is absorbed here and now it is almost solid. This is stored temporarily in the rectum part of large intestine, which is just above anus. It is expelled out through the opening called anus as feces. The expelling of feces is called egestion or defecation. In this video, I will talk about parts of a tooth, dental cavities and plaque. Let's see the parts of a tooth first. The outer covering of a tooth is called enamel. It is the hardest material in our body. Below enamel, dentine is present. Inside the dentine is pulp cavity, which consists of blood vessels, nerves and connective tissues. Improper dental care causes dental caries, which means dental cavities. Let's see how are dental caries or dental cavities caused. When we eat sugary food and don't clean our mouth properly, then these food particles remain stuck with the teeth. The bacteria in our mouth act on these sugars and form acids. This acid first dissolves calcium of enamel and then that of dentine slowly and causes cavities in the teeth. When cavity deepens, it reaches the pulp part of tooth. Then the acid formed causes a lot of pain in the tooth area due to presence of soft tissues of nerves and blood vessels in the pulp. What is dental plaque? Food particles and bacteria in our mouth form a yellowish sticky substance which gets deposited on teeth gradually if teeth are not cleaned regularly and properly. This yellow sticky deposition on teeth is called plaque. Brushing teeth after eating food removes plaque and thus saves from cavity formation in teeth. In this video, I will talk about respiration, ATP, relation between respiration and photosynthesis, and the difference between breathing and respiration. What is respiration? Respiration is a biochemical process of breaking down of glucose to release energy. It takes place at cell level. It is represented chemically as glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide, water and energy. This energy released is not used by the cell directly but is used to convert ADP into ATP. Now let's see what is ATP here. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate and ADP for adenosine diphosphate. ATP is the energy currency of body. When our body cell needs energy, the ATP in mitochondria of a cell break down into ADP to release energy. And now these ADP are to be converted back into ATP for further use. So these ADP convert into ATP by using energy released by respiration and are used as a source of energy whenever required by the body cells. One molecule of ATP releases 30.5 kJ of energy. Respiration and photosynthesis processes are just opposite to each other. Carbon dioxide and water, which are raw materials for the process of photosynthesis, are the byproducts of respiration. Oxygen is required for oxidation of glucose in respiration, while it is released as a waste product in photosynthesis. Now, let's see what's the difference between breathing and respiration. Inhaling oxygen from air and exhaling carbon dioxide involving lungs is called breathing. It is a physical process only. However, respiration is a biochemical process which takes place at the cellular level. It occurs to release energy by oxidation of glucose. Breathing is the part of respiration as it helps to take in oxygen from the air and to throw out carbon dioxide released as a result of respiration. Before I talk about types of respiration, I will define respiration first. So, respiration is a catabolic process in which glucose is broken down to release energy to meet the energy requirements of the body cells. And this respiration process is of two types. First is aerobic respiration. In this type of respiration process, oxygen is used for breaking down glucose to produce energy, and this energy is used to form ATP molecules. Aerobic respiration process takes place in two phases mainly. First phase is called glycolysis, which is anaerobic phase as it does not need oxygen. It takes place in the cytoplasm of a cell. And the second phase is known as aerobic phase because oxygen is used in this phase. It takes place in mitochondria of the cell. Higher living beings like plants, insects, birds and humans perform this kind of respiration. It is represented chemically as follows. One molecule of glucose breaks into two molecules of pyruvate or pyruvic acid in cytoplasm, and this process is called glycolysis as told earlier, and then these two molecules of pyruvate or pyruvic acid utilizing oxygen break into carbon dioxide, water and energy, and this energy is used to form ATP. So one molecule of glucose produces 38 molecules of ATP in aerobic respiration. And the second type of respiration is anaerobic respiration. As the name suggests, in this type of respiration, oxygen is not used for breaking down glucose into energy. It is done without oxygen. It is also completed in two phases. The first phase of anaerobic respiration will be same as that of aerobic respiration, which is glycolysis. It is represented chemically as one molecule of glucose breaks down into two molecules of pyruvate or pyruvic acid by glycolysis in cytoplasm, same as in aerobic respiration, and after that these two molecules of pyruvate or pyruvic acid without using oxygen, means in the absence of oxygen, break down into ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy, and the energy released here in anaerobic respiration can form only two molecules of ATP. Here both the phases are completed in cytoplasm of a cell, and one molecule of glucose produces only two molecules of ATP. This type of respiration is performed by yeast and some bacteria. Now let's know about anaerobic respiration in humans. Normally, human beings respire aerobically, but during strenuous physical activities, our body muscles, especially that of arms and legs, perform anaerobic respiration also to provide extra amount of energy required by the body. The anaerobic respiration in these muscles produces lactic acid, which causes cramps in our muscles. After taking rest for one or more days, this accumulated lactic acid breaks down into carbon dioxide and water using oxygen that becomes available later to these muscles. In this video, I'll explain human respiratory system. Human respiratory system has various organs which take part in the process of respiration. Let us understand this with the help of a diagram. Air is taken into the body through the nostrils. The air passing through these nostrils is filtered by fine hair and mucus that line the inner lining of nasal cavity. Hair and mucus catch small particles in the air breathed in, means in the air taken in. Air passes through pharynx and enters into trachea, which is also called windpipe. Larynx, also known as voice box, is present at upper part of the trachea. Trachea has C-shaped cartilaginous rings in it to save it from being collapsed, and the windpipe remains distended all the time. This trachea divides into two tubes known as bronchi, and singular is bronchus. They are also lined with cartilaginous rings. These two bronchi are connected to two lungs, one on each side. Each bronchus is divided into bronchiole and further into secondary and tertiary bronchioles. These tertiary bronchioles have small balloon-like structures at their ends, which are called alveoli and alveolus as singular. Each alveolus is a thin-walled sac-like structure and is surrounded closely by blood capillaries for easy exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. So, exchange of gases takes place at alveoli. Millions of alveoli in each lung increase area of contact with blood capillaries and make the gaseous exchange easy. Diaphragm is present just below the lungs and helps in breathing in and out. Diaphragm is a sheet of muscles which contracts when we breathe in and relaxes when we breathe out. The muscles on our ribs also contract and relax to help in breathing. In this video, I'll explain transport in human beings. Our body needs to transport food, oxygen, and waste materials, and this is done by blood. Blood performs this function with the help of blood vessels and heart. Let us know about the blood first. Blood is a fluid connective tissue which is composed of plasma, RBC, WBC, and platelets. Plasma is fluid part of blood and RBC, WBC, and platelets are the cellular part of it. Plasma transports food, carbon dioxide, and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. RBCs, which are red blood corpuscles, transport oxygen in the body. WBCs kill the germs and fight against disease causing foreign bodies. Platelets help in blood clotting or blood coagulation and heal the injury or wound or any damaged blood capillaries or blood vessels. Other important organs of transportation are blood vessels. These are tube-like structures and are of two types. Number 1, arteries. These are the blood vessels which carry blood away from the heart to various organs of the body. Blood is pumped out of the heart with high pressure, so these arteries have thick and elastic walls. Number 2, veins. These vessels collect blood from different organs and bring it back to the heart. Blood flows in the veins with low pressure, so their walls are thin. Veins have valves to avoid backflow of blood. The arteries divide into smaller and smaller vessels to supply the blood to each and every cell. The smallest vessels are called capillaries and they are 1 cell thick. These smallest arteries called capillaries join back to form vein to transport blood from organs back to the heart. To cause the flow of blood in the blood vessels, blood is pumped continuously by the pumping organ called heart. Let us understand its structure and functioning with the help of a diagram. Human heart is a fist-size muscular organ which is made of cardiac muscles. Human heart has 4 chambers and is narrower from the lower side. 2 upper chambers are called atria or auricles and the lower chambers are called ventricles. Septum divides and separates the chambers into left and right. There are present valves between atrium and ventricle, one on each side. Tricuspid valve is present in between the right chambers, and the valve between left atrium and left ventricle is known as bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Two more valves at the base of pulmonary artery and aorta are known as semilunar valves. These valves stop backflow of blood. The thickness of the lower walls, which are the walls of ventricles, is more than that of atria, as the ventricle exert high pressure to pump the blood in different parts of body. Let's see functioning of heart now. All the blood which is deoxygenated blood enters into right atrium of the heart through the main vein called vena cava. This blood enters into right ventricle passing through tricuspid valve when atrium contracts. Now this right ventricle contracts and pushes this blood into pulmonary artery. While doing so, tricuspid valve gets closed and semilunar valve at the base of pulmonary artery open. Blood through pulmonary artery reaches to the lungs and gets oxygenated. This oxygenated blood enters the left atrium of heart through pulmonary vein and is pushed down into left ventricle by contraction of atrium, passing through bicuspid valve there. This blood is pushed into main artery, that is aorta, by contraction of left ventricle, closing the bicuspid valve and opening semilunar valves at the base of aorta. When atria contract, ventricles relax, and when ventricles contract, atria relax. This causes the flow of blood in and out of the heart. This contraction and relaxation of atria and ventricles is a rhythmic and continuous process which causes heartbeat. In this video, I will talk about excretion in human beings, wherein I will explain human excretory system, structure and functioning of a nephron. Let's know what is excretion first. Excretion is the biological process of removal of metabolic waste from the body. Gaseous metabolic waste, carbon dioxide, is removed with the help of lungs, while non-gaseous metabolic waste like urea, extra amount of glucose, amino acids, salts and water are removed out of the body with the help of our excretory system in the dissolved form in water, which is called urine. After digestion, our body absorbs glucose, mineral salts and amino acids into the blood. A certain amount of these nutrients is needed in the body, and the extra amount absorbed needs to be thrown out of the body. As protein cannot be stored by the body for further use, so extra amount of protein is broken down to form urea in liver, which is a toxic substance and needs to be removed along with other things out of the body. This task is performed by our excretory system, which consists of a pair of bean-shaped kidneys, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder and a urethra at the end part. Blood reaches the two kidneys through renal artery. The blood is filtered in the kidneys and the waste in the form of urine gets collected in the urinary bladder, passing through the ureters, one joining each kidney. When this urinary bladder fills, it leads to the urge of passing the urine out through urethra. Urinary bladder is a muscular organ and is controlled by our nervous system. So we can control the urination partially. The filtration of blood and the formation of urine is performed at nephron level, as nephron is the functional unit of kidney. So let us understand the structure of nephron. A nephron has a mass of blood capillaries called glomerulus. Just below glomerulus is a cup-shaped structure called Bowman's capsule. Glomerulus and Bowman's capsule are together called renal capsule. Bowman's capsule continues down into tubule, which is convoluted in the beginning and makes a loop in the middle and is convoluted again near the end. Convoluted means coiled or twisted here. Each tubule joins the collecting duct at the end. Let's understand the functioning of nephron and the process of filtration of blood now. A thin branch of renal artery, which is called arteriole, carries the blood into glomerulus, and the substances like urea, salts, amino acids, glucose, and extra amount of water get filtered and reach into Bowman's capsule as filtrate. These all substances dissolved in water pass down into the long tubule and come in close contact with the other end of this blood vessel, where blood is left with low amount of water, glucose, salts and amino acids, and some amount of glucose, water and amino acids are reabsorbed in this blood vessel to maintain the appropriate concentration of blood. Urea, being a toxic waste, is not reabsorbed. The renal venule at the end joins renal vein, and tubule carrying waste in the form of urine joins collecting duct and pour urine into it. Large number of nephrons produce urine and throw it in the collecting duct. From there, this urine is carried down into bladder through ureters and stored there temporarily. When urinary bladder gets filled with urine, urine is removed out. That's all for now. See you soon with a new chapter.